Sideshows, also called the freak shows, were big business, especially during their heyday in the late 19th and early 20th, when the likes of Barnum promoted these spectacles. But it wasn't long before the trend stopped growing. By the 1940s, the thrill had faded, and what was once seen as wonder began to feel cruel. The banners came down, and the people who'd once been the main attraction, now forgotten by the very world that exploited them. Still, their stories remain. In this video, we'll look at the 15 bizarre circus performers that actually existed. Number 15. The Petrified Man of Florida. The story of the Petrified Man began in Mulberry, shortly after World War II. Omar Buckner, who was a Navy veteran working as a phosphate miner, claimed his dragline uncovered a massive fossilized body nearly 12 feet long beside two ancient canoes. Supervisors ordered the pit sealed, but Buckner hauled the discovery home on a flatbed truck. He later lent it to an Ohio museum, where it stayed for years before ending up at Ripley's Believe It or Not in Orlando. Experts dismissed it as a carved hoax, yet visitors swore it looked too detailed to fake. Skin texture, joints, even a face. Buckner insisted it was real until his death. Whether artifact or stunt, no one ever proved its origin. After he died, the figure vanished from records, possibly buried again. What remained was the fake story, a miner who found something extraordinary, believed in it fully, and left behind a legend that still floats between faith, prophet, and imagination. Number 14. The Jones Twins. The Jones twins were conjoined infants shown across America in the late 1800s. Barely able to sit up, they were carried from town to town, labeled the Living Wonder. Their parents, struggling for money, agreed to let them tour. Promoters took control. Doctors examined them. Strangers stared. Their small bodies became ticket sales. They lived just 15 months, half of it under circus lights. Their deaths were never recorded publicly. No one noted the cause. Illness, exhaustion, neglect, it didn't matter. Once gone, they were replaced by another act, another child. Newspapers gave them a single line. No one remembered their faces, just the title printed on posters. They were too young to walk or speak, yet their lives fed the same machine that devoured so many others. The Jones twins didn't get a legacy or legend. They got silence. In a world that sold difference as spectacle, their only mistake was being born joined and born poor. Number 13. Joe the Leopard Boy. There are a lot of people who got labeled as circus freaks, some for their unique talents, others for things they never chose. Joe the Leopard Boy was one of them. Born A.E. Bichel in 1869, his skin carried the pale patches of leukoderma, a condition that made him stand out in a world that punished difference. Barnum saw profit, gave him a costume, a cage, and a name that wasn't his. Crowds came to stare, not to see. Joe performed in dime museums, those dim rooms where people's lives became sideshows and their humanity was reduced to spectacle. He never told his story because no one asked. By 1909, reports say he fell through a trapdoor backstage and died at 40. No applause, no obituary, just quiet. His skin made him visible but erased who he was. Joe wasn't a monster or miracle. He was a man forced to live behind glass. Number 12. The Fiji Mermaid. P.T. Barnum's most famous exhibit wasn't alive. It wasn't even real. Like the 8-legged horse and 3-headed cow, the Fiji Mermaid was fake. It was a grotesque fusion of a monkey's torso sewn onto a fish's tail, dried and painted to look half-human. Barnum didn't create it. He perfected it. Bought from a sailor, it became his masterpiece of deception. Displayed under dim light, it fooled enough people to make a fortune. Scientists debated, newspapers obsessed, and Barnum printed fake letters from experts to fuel the fire. He called it proof of nature's mysteries. In truth, it was a trick made from wire, glue, and genius marketing. He didn't need believers, he needed buyers. The mermaid's success made him a household name and shaped American showmanship forever. When exposed, he didn't apologize. "The people like to be humbugged," he said, and he was right. The Fiji mermaid rotted away decades ago, but its lesson survived. People will always pay to believe what they secretly know isn't true. Number 11. The giant body of Edouard Beaupré. Edouard was born in 1881 in Willow Bunch, the first kid baptized in the town. He looked normal at birth but grew rapidly, 6 feet tall by 9 and over 7 feet 8 by 20. Kind, quiet, and strong, he wanted to be a cowboy, not a spectacle. After a horse kicked him and broke his nose, his family persuaded him to perform. He lifted barbells, carried horses, and amazed crowds across North America with Barnum and Bailey. Despite his size, he suffered constant pain and exhaustion from untreated gigantism. In 1904, while performing in St. Louis, he collapsed and died of a lung hemorrhage at only 23. His body was stolen, mummified, and displayed for decades in Montreal, used for profit and study. In 1990, 85 years later, he was finally buried in his hometown. Edouard never lived as a monster or marvel. He was a quiet man whose extraordinary body became everyone else's story except his own. Number 10. The regurgitating geek. Waldo didn't look like a sideshow act. He was polite, wore spectacles, and looked more like a teacher than a performer. But his act turned stomachs. He swallowed coins, marbles, and live mice, then brought them back up in perfect order. Sometimes he filled his stomach with water, swallowed a goldfish, and spat it out alive minutes later. There were no illusions, just practice, precision, and pain tolerance. "The Great Waldo," the posters read, "the man who eats the impossible." He toured circuses and vaudeville halls, somewhere between fascination and revulsion. Some called him a genius of control, others called him insane. He shrugged, performed, and pocketed his pay. As time went on and audiences demanded new horrors, his name faded. He was just a man who turned his own body into a stage. For a few years, Waldo made people question what they were willing to watch and why they couldn't look away. Number 9. The Ice King. Carl Brew, known to crowds as Tom Jack, built his life on endurance and illusion. Born in Austria with albinism, his pale skin and white hair made him stand out long before he stepped into a ring. He apprenticed under a traveling magician, learning escape artistry through bruises and near drownings. Ice tanks, locked coffins, frozen rivers. He turned danger into routine. His hero was Houdini, and he chased that same kind of impossible. He became the Ice King, Europe's only albino escape artist, known for surviving buried snow coffins and underwater locks. His ghostly look made him unforgettable under stage lights. He treated his condition not as shame, but identity. Crowds came expecting spectacle and left quiet, watching him climb from freezing water calm and unshaken. Carl never became rich, but he never quit. They remembered him not for what he endured, but for how he did it. Silent, steady, and colder inside than the ice itself. Number 8. Beautiful Hawaii. In the 1920s, a small traveling outfit called Copper State Shows introduced a sideshow act called Beautiful Hawaii. It wasn't Hawaiian, and neither were the performers. Two light-skinned women in grass skirts who swayed to no music and smiled under a painted sign. The setup was minimal: a tall ticket box, a bare stage, and a talker with a megaphone calling to passers-by. The women moved slowly, imitating island dances, while the MC promised exotic entertainment. There were no torches, no drums, just quick costume changes and enough suggestion to sell the illusion. In Montana mining towns, that was more than enough. Crowds paid to see something unfamiliar, even if it wasn't real. Beautiful Hawaii was never about authenticity. It was about movement, color, and escape. It was cheap to run, quick to pack, and easy to sell. For the people behind the curtain, it was business. For the people in front of it, it was a brief break from everything else. Number 7. The Two-Headed Boy of Bengal. Well, now, this is simply unbelievable. In 1783, a boy was born in Bengal with a second head fused upside down to his own. The village midwife tried to kill him by throwing him into a fire, but he survived, burned yet alive. His parents later brought him to Calcutta, exhibiting him to crowds for money. Soldiers, doctors, and colonial officers paid to see the two-headed boy. The second head blinked, drooled, and reacted independently. When the child ate, both mouths salivated. When he slept, the second stayed awake. At 4, a cobra bit him, and he died almost instantly. His body was stolen, dissected, and the skull sent to London. Doctors confirmed 2 brains, one partially developed. His remains still sit preserved in the Hunterian Museum. His condition, now known as craniopagus parasiticus, remains one of medicine's rarest records. He was born unwanted, exhibited alive, studied in death, and still trapped behind glass centuries later. Proof that fascination often outlives compassion. Circus shows were like a hell on earth. Number 6. The Glamazon. Barbara Lameé, known on stage as the Glamazon, lived unapologetically during a time that didn't make space for her. Born in LA, she transitioned long before the word transgender carried public meaning. She entered burlesque in the 1960s, performing in carnivals, small clubs, and adult theaters where her charisma filled the room. Her routines mixed humor, striptease, and authority, breaking conventions that audiences didn't yet have language for. In 1975, filmmaker Daniel D. Tioli Jr. shot Gone, Up in Smoke, about her life. The college refused to screen it, calling it obscene, but Barbara didn't need approval. The film later resurfaced, showing a performer who was bold, articulate, and fully in command. Off stage, she was equally confident, building community within early LGBTQ circles and mentoring young artists. She lived without disguise or apology, turning performance into survival and art into identity. Barbara Lameé didn't demand acceptance. She simply kept existing until the world caught up. Number 5. The Murray Midgets. John, James, and Joseph Murray, known as the Murray Midgets, were a trio of brothers who made their names on stage in the late 1800s. Advertised as triplets, they weren't the same height and likely weren't born at the same time. But the story worked. Managed by their mother, they began performing in their teens, eventually joining P.T. Barnum's shows in the 1880s and moving into the growing dime museum circuit. Their act was less about shock and more about performance, timing, humor, and musical talent. They weren't treated as grotesque. They were treated as entertainers. Posters advertised them for decades, though little else remains. No interviews, no surviving photos, just names and dates on old programs. Their mother, who ran the business side, kept them working steadily while protecting what little privacy they had. The Murray brothers weren't stars. They were workers. 3 men who traveled, performed, and stayed together at a time when being different meant being sold. All right, guys, now let's move to number 4, the unknown Irish giant. In the 1700s, Joseph Borolaski stood next to a man who towered over him, 8 feet 4 inches tall, calm, and quiet. They shook hands, one man barely reaching the other's knee. The tall man called himself the Irish Giant, but so did several others. No one knows for sure if his name was O'Brien, McGrath, or something else entirely. He toured cities, posed for drawings, and stood beside dwarves to highlight the difference. People didn't come for tricks. They came for the scale. He spoke politely, moved with care, and let the contrast speak for itself. Some say he was buried in a church vault to avoid grave robbers. Others say his bones were taken anyway. The name changed over time, but the moment with Borulaski didn't. There were no flashing lights, no stunts. Just two people, opposite in size, standing side by side. That one photograph, that simple silence, was more than enough to hold the crowd's attention. Number 3. The Danish strongman. Rasmus Nielsen, known as the Danish strongman, took pain and turned it into a business. Tattooed head to toe, he didn't lift weights the traditional way. Instead, he pierced his nose, tongue, and nipples, and used those piercings to haul serious weight. One of his signature acts involved lifting a 250-pound anvil using only nipple rings and chains. Some called it torture. Nielsen called it control. He toured with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, and Ripley's Believe It or Not, billed under names like the Scandinavian Strongman and the Tattooed Waterman. Long before body modification was a trend, he lived it. He didn't fake the pain. He didn't hide the damage. His body wasn't just part of the act, it was the act. For years, he made people flinch, stare, and rethink what a person could endure. Nielsen didn't just test limits. He built a career standing exactly where most people would have backed away. He was a real legend. Number 2. The Cape Breton giant. Angus MacAskill was born in 1825 on the Isle of Beaupré, Scotland, and moved to Nova Scotia as a child. As he grew older, he kept growing, and growing, without disease or deformity. By adulthood, he stood 7 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 580 pounds. He wasn't slow, fragile, or treated as an invalid. He hauled barrels, worked fishing boats, and carried anchors like sacks of grain. Locals called him Guy Lameé, or Big Boy. In 1849, he joined Barnum's shows and toured alongside Tom Thumb. Queen Victoria met him at Windsor Castle and gave him gifts for his strength and manners. Later, Angus returned home, bought land, and ran a general store. He died quietly in 1863 while on a supply trip. Angus never leaned on his size for showmanship. He didn't claim magic or mystery. He lived as a strong man in a small town, and for a while, his strength earned him fame. But home was always the goal. Number 1. The world's tallest Santa. Jakob Nacken stood 8 feet 1 inch and lived most of his life in the shadow of that number. Born in Germany, he performed under the name Uranus before arriving in New York for the 1939 World's Fair. When war broke out, he returned home and was eventually drafted into the German army. Captured in 1944, he was labeled the world's tallest Nazi, a headline that stuck. After the war, he returned to the US and built a different image, this time as the world's tallest Santa Claus. He performed in parades, department stores, and with Ripley's Believe It or Not. His towering frame never fit into ordinary life, so he leaned into it. He made children laugh. He posed for endless photos. But behind the image was a man described by those who met him as quiet, generous, and soft-spoken. Jakob didn't chase fame. He found a way to live with what the world couldn't stop staring at, and made it his own. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you very soon in the next one.